Oof. Yeah, that's me. Kevin Pennell getting tapped again. Welcome to the Jiu-Jitsu podcast, the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu show that explores the real challenges and rewards of the gentle art. I'm 50 years old, a blue belt, and I've been choked, twisted, and humbled more times than I can remember, but I keep coming back. Why? Because Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is more than just a martial art. It's a constant process of growth. So clip your fingernails, brush your teeth, tie that belt, and let's roll into this episode. Hey everybody, thanks for coming back to the Jiu-Jitsu podcast relaunch 2025 edition. This is from zero to rolling, everything you need to know to get started. Target here is absolute beginners, those curious about the art, but it's also for you folks who maybe have been training for a little bit, 6 months, a year, a couple years, or maybe folks training as long as me, 5 years or a little bit longer, that are curious about what I have to say. So what I'm going to do in this episode is help demystify Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, provide clear information on what it is, what it isn't, and how to take the first steps to get the most out of your start on your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu path. So again, I'm Kevin Pennell. I've been training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for about 5 years total. I'm a blue belt. I'm 50 years old, and I train 2 to 3 times a week, usually 3 times a week in the gi primarily, but also get some open mat no gi in. And that's important, and we'll talk about that as we go through to train gi and no gi. Where did Jiu-Jitsu come from? Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that is. I'll talk about where Jiu-Jitsu came from. It's a grappling-based martial art, right? Focused on submissions, leverage, positional dominance. There are stand-up throws and things, which if you watch high-level competition, every competition actually starts on the feet. So you do have to know takedowns. That's a whole another discussion on how many Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu people practice standing up or not. But let's talk about a very brief history of Jiu-Jitsu. So it started in Japan, right? It was Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, and that's what the samurai used till like the 1800s or so. And then they didn't need it. They weren't fighting each other with swords and bows and spears and things on the battleground to drop their weapon and then have to fight hand-to-hand combat. So as the samurai died out, a Jigoro Kano realized that folks still needed some self-defense. He still liked the martial arts, and he morphed Japanese Jiu-Jitsu into Judo. And one of his prize, if not the prize student that he had, was Mitsuyo Mieda, and he became very, very good at Judo, the best really in the world. And then he happened to take a trip over to Brazil, where he had business with the Gracie family, and he taught Carlos Gracie Sr. Jiu-Jitsu at the urging of his father, who he had a business dealings with. And Carlos, who was the oldest, had a younger brother named Elio, or Helio. It's really Elio, but it's spelled Helio, Gracie, which most people know as the founder of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because he had to take his smaller nature, and he was sickly when he was younger, and realize that I have to use leverage, and I can't just muscle my way through like some judokas are. And so he changed the whole game. And then Elian had a few sons, and of those, there are some that stand out greatly. One is Rorion Gracie, who is the founder of the UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championship, who had the idea that let's showcase this Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu against wrestlers and boxers and kung fu people and karate. And so famously, you may have seen Royce Gracie, Rorion's brother, in his white jiu-jitsu gi with his black belt, choking people out in the first UFC. The first one was in 93, and then subsequent years after that. In addition to Rorion and Royce, Rickson Gracie, Rickson, one thing to learn early in your jiu-jitsu exposure, time, career, journey, etc., is the R's are pronounced like H's. So Rorion is actually R-O-R, Rickson is actually R-I-C-K, Royce is actually R-O-Y-C. So when I'm saying their names, understand that many of these folks start with an R. Rickson, Royce, Hoyler, Holes. Holes was one of their brothers as well that brought wrestling into jiu-jitsu. So the Gracies, super influential, right? And that was through UFC and their own fights, Gracie Challenge, where they would get other martial arts, traditional martial arts boxers, etc., to challenge them in their own gym. There's videotapes of those. Go on YouTube, check them out. That's the very fast getting from Japanese Jiu-Jitsu to Judo to getting it to Brazil to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu history. Go look up more of that. It's good to know the full history of things that you're going to spend time and money and put sweat and blood and tears into, which you will do in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu if you stick with it. So what is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu not? It's not just for big, huge, muscular people. There are some gyms that are more athletically inclined or MMA fighter inclined, where I train is kind of like that. And there are gyms where you have folks that are way more into kind of using their limbs and sticky and very technique based. You have to know technique regardless of the body style you have or the jiu-jitsu style you have. But some is more art, some is more strength, some is a mix of both. And the great thing is that they all work in their own fashion, right? It's not all about fighting, though it is a fighting art. It is a combat sport. Make no mistake about it. It's also about getting in shape and pushing yourself through hardship and checking your ego about what you can or can't do. Most folks, I will tell you, that have come in new when I've been training myself when I started 5 years ago and since then, have no idea how to grapple, right? So imagine that extrapolated across the world, because most folks aren't training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and you really quickly learn what you can and can't do, and that's either going to scare you away or make you want to stay there and get better. So in the brief history, I mentioned judo, Japanese jiu-jitsu, wrestling. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu really brings a lot of that together, with the focus being getting to a submission or a tap, right? By a choke, by I don't feel good in my joints, by freaking out, smothering. There's a lot of different ways to basically make the other human quit. So the differentiation broadly is judo largely is focused on a takedown, right? A throw, a trip, something. And I'm not a judo practitioner. There's judo mixed in what I do. Wrestling is getting a pin, right? And jiu-jitsu, the big difference between jiu-jitsu and wrestling is when I'm on my back in jiu-jitsu, I'm not out or getting the tap or the pin. I'm in the fight still. Judo has ground game too. They don't show it as much on when you watch judo a lot in the Olympics or other things, but it definitely does. And that's a big basis of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? But you have to wrestle a little bit. You have to know judo things a little bit. And then the core of Jiu-Jitsu, and to me, that's the kind of mix together of things, the hodgepodge, if you will, of grappling arts that make up Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So what are the benefits of getting into this thing that's going to make you sore, more tired, all that kind of stuff? You're going to be in better shape overall. Your grip's going to get better. Your lungs are going to get better, stronger. Your flexibility will be there. Your coordination and weight management, right? Having a steady base to stand on will get better. It has to, or you won't last long in jiu-jitsu. Or you'll learn quickly that you get easily swept. Mentally, you will be more confident pretty quickly after you start. You'll have more discipline. You got to get your stuff ready. You got to go there, be on time, pay attention, have discipline, and not be chit-chatting the whole time. You're going to learn how to problem solve skills, both offensively when you're trying to submit somebody and defensively. You'll get stress out just like exercise does. Exercise to me is the greatest medication for stress management and reduction. In jiu-jitsu, you'll burn 500-600 calories a class, regular class, let alone if you do a long like open mat for hours where you're doing 7-minute rounds, you'll burn easily 1,000 calories maybe. And mental resilience, right? This is one of the hardest parts. It's harder than the physical part, actually, to me, is making yourself go when you're tired or being in a horrible spot in your fourth roll for the day, you're exhausted, and not freaking out because you're getting crushed, right? That to me is my Achilles heel in jiu-jitsu that I've worked through and I'm working through. But it makes your mind a lot stronger for when you have other challenges in life. There's also a huge camaraderie in jiu-jitsu. Some of the most dangerous people I know, I train with, and they can fight. A lot of them stand up and jiu-jitsu, some just jiu-jitsu, some a mix, whatever. And they're super cool and nice because you're all going through shared hardship, right? And this happens at every gym I've trained at, whether it's going back to my old gym, going to a guest gym, my regular gym. Everybody's cool. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to whip your butt when you're rolling, but they're very nice about it and they're welcoming. So I've mentioned some of the benefits. So how do you get started? Go to the Google, look up Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and pick one that's close to where you are. If there's a couple, then pick out ones that look really professional, well put together, and look up their instructors. You can look up the instructor. You can see where they got their black belt, where they got their black belt. I am so fortunate who I train with now was directly promoted to black belt from Renzo Gracie, one of the greatest jiu-jitsu champions, fighters, let alone trainers that helped build John Danaher, who has now built the greatest jiu-jitsu player in Gordon Ryan. So the lineage is amazing. And there are other amazing lineages all throughout Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So look that up, see where it is, make sure it's close to your house, see where the instructor came from, and then say, hey, I'd like to come in and watch a class or be in a trial class, right? See what the atmosphere is like. Is it positive, right? What kind of style do they have? It's going to look rough at first, right? If you're not used to grappling or haven't done any kind of martial art, see if it's clean. Does it stink? Does it smell like an old dirty wrestling room? Not one that's been clean, but one that like isn't clean, like a dirty basement kind of musty smell. Check out the class schedule and the cost. These practical things, it has to be close to where you live. It should be within your budget. and the schedule needs to fit when you'll actually go, those are huge factors that are practical that you have to consider. Because it could be an hour away or it could be 10 minutes away. And if it's too expensive and the schedule doesn't work, you're still not going to go if it's just right down the road. Don't be afraid to try that trial class, right? I recommend not rolling your first class. I would maybe do the moves. You do drills. Typically, you do warm-up, either running around warm-ups or just warm-up rolling, which is tough. So that's like a really slow kind of grappling competition, but you're not really trying too hard. You're just moving through the paces in a warm-up round. And then you're going to learn a specific move or a couple moves and practice those over and over again. Then I would watch the class, see what it's like rolling. Or if you're inclined and you're encouraged to roll your first day, roll with someone who is not a white belt, because they have been training at least a year, probably a couple years and higher, and they know how to deal with you if you're spazzy, or be gentle if you're very cautious. And this is for men and women. So always choose a colored belt to roll with when you're brand new, because they're not trying to beat you. They know they can beat you in a grappling match, and they're trying to welcome you and help you on your first day. So on your first day, just wear a t-shirt and shorts, right? Wear shoes when you get there. If it's cold, obviously warm up. But when you're getting ready to step on the mat, no shoes. Make sure your fingernails are clipped and your toenails are clipped. You've brushed your teeth. You don't have stank breath, deodorant, whatever. You don't have to have no cologne, all that jazz. You don't have to be super smelly. But just a t-shirt and shorts is fine. It's perfect. Don't buy a gi until you know you want to train jiu-jitsu. Okay. And even then, there's some opportunity where you don't even have to train in the gi, but I highly recommend that you do both. So what are some barriers that I've heard and concerns about starting? I'm too old to start. Nonsense. I started when I was 44. There's someone I trained with in the morning regularly that started when they were 63. So don't say the age thing. If you're in your 80s or 90s, that's probably legit. But there are people that have gotten their purple belts, brown belts, black belts in their 70s and 80s. It's a different kind of jiu-jitsu for them, but it's jiu-jitsu, right? The other excuse, I'm too out of shape to start. It doesn't matter. I worked out a lot, kind of like CrossFit, but in my own home gym and some running and things. And I got smoked because you're using your muscles and your lungs and everything, and it's a different kind of fitness. So everyone that doesn't grapple already is out of shape, but that doesn't matter. You were out of shape before you started working out or biking or anything else, right? You didn't know how to do your job before you got trained. Same principle, right? You don't have to be super flexible, but you should work on flexibility outside of that. And I'll talk about that in future episodes. And then safety. This is very much a contact sport, but it's not a hitting you in the head contact sport. Okay. And the key is, if you feel uncomfortable, if you feel like you're going to get hurt, you tap your partner a couple times, 3 times, and then they let you go. So the good thing is with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you can go full force and not be smacking someone's head with your knees or your elbows, which there's a place for that. That's a good type of stand-up training, but you're grappling and you can really get after it. And yes, you could be sore. Yes, you could have something happen, but it's a lower likelihood. And again, if you're brand new, don't go crazy, because the person you roll with, if they are a higher level, is going to calm you down, and it's probably not going to feel great. There's some etiquette and culture you should consider, right? And it's the hygiene I talked about. Just don't be smelly. Don't go there if you have sores or open wounds or anything. It's gross. Nobody wants to be exposed to that. Learn some terminology. Do some research ahead of time. What is guard? What is side control? Not every gym has an intro program. If you have one that has that, which means you get a couple of weeks where that's all you do is intro and basics, that's great. What's shrimping? If not, do some research on your own and then ask questions when you're working with somebody, and ask your instructor that's there. So here are some recommended resources for you to find a place. One, just go to Google and do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu near me to find your gyms near you. And here's some resources that are inspirational, educational, and then some podcasts. So the first 2 categories are YouTube channels. The first one is Stuart Cooper Films. Stuart Cooper makes, by far, in my mind, the best jiu-jitsu films ever. They will inspire you and educate you and highlight some of the greatest competitors in jiu-jitsu in history. Along with that, Jiu-Jitsu Brotherhood by Nick Gregoriaris, probably screwed up his last name. Also, very good background, how it's changed his life, some inspirational stories just to get that, okay, I want to go train feel. Educational YouTube, probably the best well-known is Bernardo Ferreira, BJJ Fanatics. Huge honor for me is his saying there. Chew-Jitsu, or Chewy's, guy with the big beard. Great topics. He's both educational and inspirational. and then yoga for BJJ. So I talked about flexibility not being a crucial part as you get into jiu-jitsu. I do yoga at least once a week, maybe twice, along with weights, high intensity interval training, and jiu-jitsu throughout the week. So I mix it up, but yoga is always there because a good stretch is helpful. I also do some cold exposure. Podcast for BJJ. The only podcast I listen to regularly for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is Bulletproof for BJJ, a couple Australian blokes. It's a very good podcast, and they are unfiltered and give you the scoop from 2 black belts too, so you get even more in depth from them. So I would be remiss if I did not include Jocko podcast, which has really got me into jiu-jitsu and inspired to do it, between him and Joe Rogan listening, which is probably thousands of people at this point that were inspired by Jocko and Joe Rogan. But specifically Jocko podcast number 293, where you can hear from Rickson Gracie about his story and how he started and some more history and how he got over his fears. You also want to listen to number 344 with Dean Lister, who is Jocko Willink's regular Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training partner at Victory MMA out in San Diego. And he's also a world champion jiu-jitsu player who really got good. He's good at everything, but particularly at leg locks, and brought those up. And then 414, Tom DeBlas, another champion jiu-jitsu player, and really good philosophical. He used it a lot. He had an abusive childhood, and he uses jiu-jitsu to empower others for them to get past bullies and things like that. So 293, 344, and 414 of the Jocko podcast. And then, of course, the Jiu-Jitsu podcast, which is for you, right? It's to help you learn from my mistakes, from what I did well or not, from other folks, from knowledge that I've been given. This isn't just my knowledge and things. It's what I've learned through roles from my professors, instructors, teammates, outside doing my own research. And I hope this helps you, and I appreciate your time. Please go to the peopleprocessprogress.com website, and you can contact me there or check out stories. I focus on the People Process Progress podcast on largely leadership and project and program management. And I love jiu-jitsu, so I have this podcast as well. But that's the main website. You can contact me there, leave comments. I'll post episodes there as well. Thank you so much for taking the time. Remember, as you get started, as you get into this, and in life, sometimes you have to slow down and breathe. Frame, whether you're putting physical frames up with your arms or mental ones for the stress around you, and survive. Keep showing up. Keep putting the work in. Godspeed, y'all.